Um, the nuclear power industry has been in decline since Chernobyl. It kind of reached this high watermark, and after Chernobyl, I think people realised that it's a fundamentally dangerous technology, and that we can't trust the nuclear industry. We can't trust it not to lie to us. We can't trust it not to put safety first. We just can't trust it. You mentioned the spying. Last year, Ecosocialism de France was convicted in France of spying on Greenpeace. It put computer viruses into our computers to record the touching of the keyboard so that it could look at all of our passwords, and they got into our entire system because we, in France, we're sort of very prominent in opposing the nuclear industry and exposing its failings and its safety flaws and its security flaws. So you can't trust the nuclear industry. I mean, people will know that nuclear power, subsequently after Chernobyl, we've seen Fukushima, and the lies that came out of the nuclear industry over Fukushima, first of all, it's fine, we've got it under control, and then, oh no, we haven't, it's still a meltdown. Even like a year later, they're still sort of allowing radioactive waste into the seas. And people in the area of Fukushima won't be able to go back to their homes for decades, perhaps never. Clearly, nuclear power and this very sort of concentration of wealth and power around the industry protects it from the scrutiny that it should have. But it is in decline because it's clearly not safe. People don't want it. After Fukushima, or just before Fukushima, it sort of reached this point where it was trying to get more support on the basis of sort of it being low carbon and good for climate change and so on. But Fukushima exposed it again, and the order books have gone right down. So they are desperate. Particularly EDF is desperate to get a foothold into Britain to show that it can stand on its own 2 feet, it can be economically competitive, it doesn't need public subsidy for and there has been no nuclear power station built anywhere at any point in the world that hasn't needed public subsidy, and it will be the same for this one. So there's months and months of wrangling with our government over subsidies, for hidden subsidies. So Greenpeace here, and I led the anti-nuclear campaign until the start of this year. We've been exposing EDF for trying to get these behind sort of backdoor subsidies to prop up, because it's just not profitable to run such an expensive industry when there are such sort of more useful alternatives. The renewable power is clean, it's proven, it can be done on a mass scale. I mean, part of the problem is I spoke about the problems that there are hundreds of millions of people in the world without access to electricity. You're not going to be able to replace coal and increase access to electricity with nuclear. It's just too small scale, too slow to build. Whereas you can do that with renewables. They're very, very rapid to scale up, and the costs are coming down all the time, whereas the cost of nuclear are going up all the time. So it's got this, like, one of the technologies, the only technology in the world perhaps, with this inverse cost curve. Every other technology, as it gets more mature, becomes cheaper, and this one just gets more expensive. So yeah, we can definitely get rid of nuclear power, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take a proper struggle, particularly in France. And I know that my French colleagues are working very hard at that. But it's difficult because there are jobs associated with it. There are lots of vested interests. But what I was saying in my talk was that we need to be able to paint a picture that's convincing about an alternative system that brings jobs and economic security and different types of industries. So definitely on that, on electricity and sort of other sort of green industries. In general, we definitely support alternative electricity companies. In Britain, I don't know if it's the same in France, but in Britain we've just got 6 big companies that dominate the electricity and heating generation and supply, and it's got a stranglehold on the system. There's just not enough competition, and it prevents us having a decentralised system of electricity. It prevents us seriously tackling the growth in demand for power. We need this. You mentioned the word megawatts. We need to reduce the amount of energy that we use in the West, and so it's great that there are companies like Ecosocialism that are trying to pull in a different direction. Greenpeace doesn't have any permanent alliances with any companies or governments or parties, so we won't sort of positively endorse them as a company, because we can't take responsibility for everything that they do, but in general it's good that there's that plurality. And the same with the banking world, it's great that there are sort of alternatives to those sort of really big, sort of monolithic, backward banking structures. We do a lot of work with the Co-op Bank and with Triodos on a number of different issues, and they play a good role in many respects. We wouldn't endorse them as a company as a whole, but we work with them on a lot of different issues, particularly on tar sands. In Canada, we've got a very strong relationship over campaigning against tar sands in Canada.
Can I come up with a couple of things? I'll probably need to go fairly soon because I live kind of out of town. And we're not in an eco-socialist society where there are trends or liking it. I was going to talk a bit about the kind of business and banks and the 99%. I wouldn't emphasise the business stuff. Because I think at the moment, I mean, if people are going to electricity and got bank and so on, that's great. I'm certainly not knocking it, but I think a lot of the kind of mainstream approach is to say it's down to individuals and how they consume. And what we, as I think we all know and agree, is we need to change things more structurally. So, for example, if you look at the banks, the Co-op Bank sadly is in crisis and might have to float. And we've had this disaster where the government, Thatcher government, changed the banking regulation, pumped them up with the steroids of sort of strange finance, allowed the building societies, which were mutual, owned by the people who put money in. And okay, quite often the structures, it's like the Soviet Union. In theory it's completely mutual and lovely and communistic, and quite often the building societies went wrong. I don't think they killed lots of kulaks, but they certainly weren't socialist institutions. But they were then encouraged to become private companies, so all the time. And this is where I quote Ostrom, who wasn't a Marxist like me. You've got to look at the codes and the regulations and the structures and what the government's doing and these webs of power, and see how you can change that. And then if you do that, it's much easier to have the right structures. So if people find it useful intervention, I'm not knocking it, but it tends to be go off individually and consume in different ways and support the green businesses. And I think we need more structural change. To the extent you do individual stuff, I think it's good if it's not emphasising commodification, it's emphasising community, and it's emphasising things which are kind of pleasurable. So I'm on the lowest tier of British local government as a parish councillor in Ascot, surrounded by Tories. But we've got our annual bike ride, and that isn't Marxism, but it's not. It's another way, different from green business, to promote some greenness. And again, with the kind of 99%, I'm in a very conservative community, but the fact that the local hospital is under threat, people mobilise massively for that. So, if you've got a green business project, I'm not going to utterly condemn you, but I think it's got to be much more about changing the structures. There's far too much emphasis on individual action, and where there is action, quite often it's commodified. Well, another thing one of my colleagues who's a councillor does now, another parish council, has like a seed swap, and people bring their seeds and swap and so on. So there is some stuff which is, maybe a bit softer, maybe bringing people who are, not instantly set to get rid of capitalism. But I think there are some, in that kind of way, there are some things which aren't just green business. So I'm certainly not utterly knocking it, but it's not, what I would emphasise.
I will try in English, but if I feel that it's too much a limitation for what I would like to tell, I will ask Tatiana's help to be sure to express myself in a correct way. First thing was about this idea that do we have time to get rid of capitalism? And do we have time? Just this question, because we said we have this 5-10 years And we were also talking about that during the break. A few things about that. First thing maybe, because we were talking about Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, things can be quite fast. I mean, when the citizens' revolution starts, things can go very rapidly, and I would even say they have to go rapidly, because everybody knows that what is not achieved during the 2 first years of the revolution won't be achieved after that. So in that sense, and the evolutions today in the European Union, and especially as far as monetary issues are concerned, and I of course think about the Eurozone, things are evolving in such a way that we may very well encounter a collapse that will not be our fact. I mean, it's not this citizens' revolution that we would like to see, but there might be a collapse, and after that we don't know what can happen, and things can go very fast, departing from this point. So that was the first thing. Second thing is that I think that we cannot have this revolutionary approach that would consist in saying that as far as we haven't overcome capitalism, then we can't do anything, because anyway, since capitalism is there, we can't do anything. Of course, there are many things we can do now without waiting for the end of the system, and a few of these have already been mentioned, and I will come back to that later. But my real question about this is that I think we have already reached some irreversible points as far as climate is concerned, meaning that the choice now is not between saving the climate or not saving it. It's just on the wideness of the change and the amount and the number of degrees. The question is only there because the change is already happening and is going to happen, and to a degree. There was also the question about nuclear power. On this issue, the French situation is quite specific, because you know in France it's 75% of production of electricity, not energy, but electricity. And this is the only country around the world, and that's not a very happy middle for us, but that's the case. And so it's also, I say that because it's also a difficulty factor for many people, because people in France, they have been told that it was 75%, and they don't have the end of the sentence. So they think that 75% of all the energy that we consume in France comes from nuclear power, which is not right. It's only electricity. But they have this in mind, and since the 70s, everything has been made in France to implement electricity and nuclear power everywhere, even with nonsense decisions. For instance, electric radiators have been put in all the buildings, even social buildings, while it's not efficient for energy and it's expensive for the people. So all the choices have been made on nonsense arguments to develop the nuclear industry. So now we are at a point where it's very difficult to go back about this. So there is of course all that we have to do as far as information is concerned. Every time there's a major nuclear accident, of course, we see that people are more afraid, etc. But I wouldn't be as optimistic as you, saying that they don't want nuclear power because they think they need it. So they don't even think about wanting or not wanting. They think they just need it. But we have to demonstrate, to prove, also on this subject, first of all, that it is possible. Not desirable, or that will come second. The first thing is to prove that it's possible to stop nuclear power in France. And the gigawatt scenario is a very useful tool for us, because they have a scenario very modelized on 30 years, proving that that combining the reduction of our consumption of energy by gaining on efficiency and restricting the use that is useless. And developing renewables for the energy needs that are left, on 30 years you can divide carbon emissions by 4 and stop nuclear power. So it's very useful for us because it's not a political party, it's not an ideological position, it's not about good or bad, it's just proving with scientific experts and mathematic modeling that it is possible. So I think we have really to work on that and with that. And yes, we are not all, we don't all agree within the Frontdoor Gauche, and especially with the Communist Party, with our friends from the Communist Party, we don't agree on that. They place climate change as a challenge first, before stopping nuclear power. So we also have to give more elements about the carbon emissions due also to nuclear power, because it's not a clean energy without gas emissions. It's so we have to say that, and we keep on having the debate, of course, with them. And I think that really things move on, especially from the base.
The activists.
Yeah. One point which is a good point of debate, and maybe a point of disagreement or debate with Louise and also with the Greens in France, is about introducing competition in the electricity and energy market that would allow a better functioning of the market. This is something, it's an hypothesis that we reject because it doesn't work for any other supply, so there is no reason that it would work for energy. And we think, on the contrary, that if we want to stop nuclear power, we have to collectively have the means to make this decision. If we have to go and see the big companies to ask them if please they would help us reduce our consumption, we won't be able to do it. So that's the reason why the Frontdoor Gauche, and that's all the organizations in the Frontdoor Gauche, we also have a campaign for public sector of energy that would allow us collectively with the citizens to make our own choice and get back this sovereignty that we have lost as far as energy is concerned. I will try to be more fast, but I have to look for my words, so I suggest I have extra time. Just a few words about jobs as far as nuclear power is concerned. Half of the employees in EDF are going to retire in the 20 coming years. So that's the first good step as far as jobs are concerned. If Hollande doesn't play too bad with the retirement age.
I feel very rude, but thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing is also that there's a huge job creation potential to stop the nuclear plants and you know, deconstruct them and take care of their life after the stop. So we also work on these options. About the 99%, I think it was a very interesting question, because one of our major challenges is to reunify this 99%, and that's where class struggle becomes a very accurate and present issue, because everything has been done so that this 99% don't recognize themselves and compete with each other. We have to reunify them, and that's all that we say about oligarchy, and saying that even though you don't have the same jobs, you don't have the same lifestyles, you don't live in the same places, you all have a common point, which is that you are exploited by these happy few grabbing all the wealth only for themselves. So I think that's what the point of what we have to do. And about the question about the banks and electricity companies and how we can act, I'm used to saying that there are 3 different levels of actions, political action. There's the individual level, and that's changing your bank to go to a cooperative bank, or going to buy your food by the producer and not at the supermarket, that kind of things. Then there's a collective level. That's all associations taking part in collective actions, and the institutional political level, being part of a party, being elected, etc., etc. And these 3 levels of activism they are complementary. They don't exclude each other. So, because we know that individual or collective action, there has been since at least the 60s, but it doesn't hurt the system. It doesn't enable us to overcome the capitalism. What will enable us to overcome capitalism are individual, collective actions, but also institutional. We have to be convinced that we can take the power, and we need a strategy to take the power. We must, as a radical left, stop thinking as a minority, because we are the 99%. And ourselves, we need to convince ourselves first, before being able to convince the majority. And about the 16th of June and this meeting, so it was a meeting with, it was initiated by the Frontdoor Gauche, but it was quite large because there was attack and that kind of different kind of associations like ATAC, but also trade unions, and also other political parties not members of the Frontdoor Gauche. They didn't take part as political parties. It was more like leaders coming, individuals. So it was some political leaders from the left of the Parti Socialiste, and from Europe Écologie Les Verts, so the Green, French Greens. And we had many debates on various subjects. more than one on environment. So that was quite interesting, especially there was one about ecological transition and industry, so mixing both the subjects. It was quite important because there were like 2,000 people, and the idea was really to see whether we are able to build an alternative majority in France, gathering all the people who disagree with austerity, who disagree with the European treaties and liberal politics. So both coming from the European Union and from the government. So that was really the point, because we have seen during the last few weeks that the Greens have more and more voted at the Parliament, as we did, on different law projects. And so we are trying to see if we can build this alternative, again, exactly what I was saying, to take the power. Because our objective is not to be pure but small. Our objective is to change life. And for that we need to gather, not gather anyone just to be elected, but gather all the ones who agree on the project, no matter where they act. And if some people in the Parti Socialiste agree